I'm Tom Brown. I'm the owner of Equanimity Psychological Services, which is a central London psychotherapy service. And today I'm going to be talking with Nancy Baker about a very sensitive, a very hot topic, which is domestic violence. So domestic violence is very, very common. We now know that about a third of the world population is experiencing or has experienced domestic violence. And in the UK alone, around 2 women and 7 men are killed every month through the hands of a partner or an ex-partner. So it's a big issue. It's something that affects so many people. And today I'm going to get some insight from Nancy Baker as well, who's a health promoter. So she does a lot of work through social media, through talks, and through other means. And she has had herself a first-hand experience through domestic violence. And we're going to have a little chat with that.
You know, one thing we've talked about as we've talked about this, I had married somebody that I thought was very sensitive because when we were dating, when we get to a topic that might blow up, he would just stop talking. And so I thought, okay, maybe I'm too overbearing and I can work on that. After we got married, I found out he had anger issues. And so once we were married, he let me know how he felt about different things. So it was a different ball game. So I learned he had anger issues. And that's when I said for the longest time, I didn't realize there was physical abuse or verbal abuse until later. So I think part of it, as we've talked, one thing I did, you know, when you are married, you don't tell everybody all your business. When you have an argument with someone, you really need to reconcile with that person. And if you tell other people stuff, they're not part of that resolution. So they may end up having ill feelings towards someone that doesn't get resolved. So I was pretty protective of my marriage, trying to make sure I talked to him about things, which we really didn't talk about a whole lot of stuff. He would use anger to keep from talking about things. He learned that if he would yell or throw something, that would stop the conversation and we would quit talking about anything. So, you know, it took me a while to figure out that I was in an abusive relationship. And like I said, it started out with when he did get physical, it would be throwing something. And so he wasn't hurting me at first, but then it did escalate. So that's kind of my background.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's really important to note that not everybody knows if they're experiencing domestic violence, and a lot of it isn't necessarily physical or sexual. It could be through someone trying to isolate you. It could be through someone trying to get angry, someone trying to control you. And often those are the first signs when we realize that there is a problem here. It can sometimes go on for many years, and people don't realize that coercive behavior, that controlling behavior is happening, and people, to an extent, enable that person who's doing it by tolerating it, and often that will escalate. And in most cases, domestic violence will escalate, and it will lead to something more severe. It may lead to even physical violence, sexual violence in many cases. So it really is important to pay attention to not just the physical stuff, the emotional stuff. And anyone who's thinking that way, they may have a good reason to think they are a victim of something. And for you, if you want to just try and find out, just think in your mind, what is it that's happening? Is it something that an outsider would see as unacceptable? Or is it something that you're tolerating that you don't think that is acceptable? So often this is the first stage in identifying or tackling the issue through that way. And I know, Nancy, you said it started off with anger, and later on it turned into throwing stuff, so escalation parts. And at that point, some people may reach a stage where it's crisis, but for others, they might allow that to happen and to tolerate it for longer periods like that.
One thing you mentioned about enabling, that was one thing that was happening, but part of what would happen is even talking about Saturday, our day off, what are we going to do? You know, he stayed home. Out of the 4.5 years we were married, he worked outside the house for 2 years. The other time he was at the house with the kids. So I was working full time. And on Saturdays, he wanted a break from the kids, but he didn't talk to me about it. He just left the house. What happened is one day I figured out he was taking a shower and then he was gone, and we hadn't talked about it. Well, meanwhile, we have these 8-year-old twin girls that are his, and we have his grandson that's 2. So I tried to talk to him, but the whole enabling at that point, for me to not enable him, I would have had to just leave the house and say, these are your kids, you need to take care of them. Well, I mean, I couldn't do some of that stuff because of the kids. But what I did do later is, one morning I got up, and when he went in the shower, I left the house. I mean, it's not that I was trying to be immature, but I couldn't talk to him. So I did what I could do. And I'd say, look, we didn't talk about it, but we didn't talk about, we couldn't talk about it before. So just a little extra thing there.
Yeah. And I think you raised up some important points. And sometimes we might have something in our lives, some sort of reason as to why we would stay in this particular situation for a point of time. And it could be that you have something shared. It could be children together, but it could be to do with a mortgage, a house, something that you feel you need to have that person to be with you in that moment. And often this is one of the reasons why people would stay, why they would tolerate for that. But the important thing is that there is always a solution. It may not be a simple solution, an easy solution, but it's something that can be done. And at the end of the day, is your respect, your dignity to live in a safe, in a nice environment, without fear of bad things happening, of becoming harmed, being regularly upset. So I think that's really the next stage, is the practical side of it. So if I feel now that I don't want to tolerate this, what can I do practically to try and make this change? So it could be something more extreme, like leaving for a period of time, staying with family. It could be any other means. It could be going even to, in some cases, a refuge. There's some certainly that exist in the UK. I'm sure there are safe houses as well in the US, if people are in trouble. And even in the extreme cases, you may need to call the police if you have been abused, if you have been hit, if you've been assaulted. We know, sadly, that women in particular were assaulted around 100 times plus before they call the police, and there are lots and lots of different reasons behind that. It might be something simple, like, I don't want my partner to get in trouble. It might be, what is the other solution? I don't know. What if people don't believe me? There can be all these sorts of reasons. But once we get to a stage where we identify the problems there, and then start to problem solve, what can I do about it? I don't want to deal with this. I don't want to have to put up with this. Then that's often the next stage in trying to improve our situation. Well, there are loads and loads of organisations out there that are designed. In the UK, there are lots of advice lines. There are refuges, as I said. And it's important to note that it's not just women, and it's a misconception. A lot of the literature talks about women being abused. Actually, about a third of victims are men. And in some cases, men will tolerate it for the fact that they think that there are gender, embarrassment reasons. Actually, it doesn't matter what gender you are. Domestic violence shouldn't really be tolerated, and it often will lead to, not only escalation, but linked to emotional difficulties later on in life. It could be someone becoming more depressed. It could even be, more severe things like getting anxiety issues going on. So this is, for anyone watching, anyone who can relate to being in a relationship, of being coerced, of being bullied. And that could be in many ways. It could be being told what not to wear, what to wear, where you're allowed to go, being told you're not allowed to see your family. It could be a whole host of things, even giving threats. If you don't do what I say, I will harm your family, I will harm your pets even. So this is really important to try and figure out, are you in this situation? And secondly, you don't have to be in this situation.